Hello students, so this video is going to serve as an introduction for project number 2, which asks you to do an intersectional annotated bibliography. Um, so I first off want to start by looking at assignment sheet number 2. So paper number 2 is an intersectional annotated bibliography. You'll notice the quote from Kimberly Crenshaw, "If we can't see a problem, we can't fix it." Intersectionality is the idea that oppression is linked. You're going to read a lot more sources about intersectionality. It's important to rhetoric and rhetorical studies because it asks you to think more expansively about the rhetorical situation. So you guys definitely looked at the rhetorical situation for paper number 1 when you're looking at why your rhetor or your author had to say the things that they said in a certain way. You looked at the rhetorical situation as that being one of the issues. Looking at people's social location, looking at a controversial topic through the different social locations really helps us more expansively understand a problem. So in so many ways, intersectionality is a rhetorical concept. So I first want to go over what is required of you in this annotated bibliography. First of all, it's kind of a weird genre in terms of a paper because it's not a traditional paper. There are 2 samples in the Schoology material that you're going to want to take a look at. There's 2 sample papers. So if you scroll down, you'll see paper 2 sample and paper 2 sample number 2. Those give you a really good idea about what the paper should look like. Because it's a 500-word synthesis essay and then 8 annotations, 8 sources, 1 book, 2 newspaper/magazine articles, 3 scholarly journal articles, 2 credible internet sources. Each of these sources need to have a minimum of 150-word annotation below them. So let's take a look at this sample just to get a good idea of what I'm asking you to do, what it looks like, without really looking at the content so far. So you'll see this document is about 8 pages. There is the 500-word synthesis essay. There is the source, the citation, and then there's the annotation. Okay, citation, annotation. This person has done this for all 8 sources. Okay, MLA format on the citation, 20% of your final grade. So I'm asking you to take a current controversial topic and research it in an intersectional manner. Intersectionality is a concept born from Black feminist thought, understanding oppression as linked, not separate. So the readings that we're reading is going to help you find what I mean by intersectionality. So much understanding is lost when we think through an issue in a flat way with just pros and cons. Understanding an issue from multiple perspectives, including the power dynamics of race, gender, class, ability, and sexuality, gives researchers a more complete picture of the issue. So one of the examples I give here is that the Standing Rock, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and the issues that engineers and oil industry professionals had with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe might have been avoided if those engineers and industry professionals thought more intersectionally on the topic. Like, how is this protected culture that has been pushed onto these reservations and slighted throughout all of American history, how do we take them into account, or should we take them into account, right? If the engineers and oil industry professionals thought about this topic intersectionally, they might actually have they might actually have decided to reroute the pipeline. And so that's really the idea that this project has you take a look at. It says, hey, look at this really controversial issue. And instead of saying pro-life, pro-choice, these are the sides I'm going to research, I'm going to say, look at all this from these different people's positions. Look at this, find articles that help you position this from a lot of different people's positions. What about from abortion from a man's perspective, abortion from a rich woman's perspective, abortion from a poor woman's perspective, abortion from a woman of color's perspective, abortion from a Catholic woman's perspective. And so what are we losing here when we only think of it as pro-con? So that's what this project is having you take a look at. Finding sources that help think through different people. So you will need to find a piece of policy. So I'm here, intersectional policy. So your job will be to research policy from an intersectional perspective. So if you looked at the Keystone Pipeline, your job is to find articles, books, and publications that help us understand this policy in an intersectional manner. So how does age, race, sex, class, ability, nationality, and sexuality come up on policy decisions? Some of these identities and certain controversial topics are definitely going to be brought to the forefront. Some of them aren't going to be as relevant. Some of them are going to be deeply relevant. Some of these are more relevant than you think, as you start to do the research, you're like, wow, why aren't people thinking about abortion access in rural areas or something to that effect? And so your job is to find, that's why I give you 8 sources. Is not one source is going to give you an intersectional look at the Dakota Pipeline. You might find the Dakota Pipeline from a rural community. You might find a Dakota Access Pipeline from the Native community. You might find from, an oil industry professional, so someone a little wealthier. And then your job is to piece through that research, and that once you have all the 8 sources, you've come at this in an intersectional way. So the structure of the project, you have the synthesis essay. And for this essay, so that's the first part, it's a 500-word essay and explains the conversation that you find about your topic in these sources. Explaining how each of these sources help you see the intersectional angles of the policy. So the goal is not to say this is what I feel about this policy or this is my position, but the goal of this essay and the entire project really is to show to myself and your audience positions, factors, etc. that need to be considered in order to look at this policy in an intersectional manner. You should also provide a summary of the benefits of looking at this policy in an intersectional manner. Remember that most policies don't consider intersectional identities. So this essay should talk about how an intersectional analysis is more socially justice-minded way of composing policy. Okay? And you might also want to provide ways the policy could change to take into account intersectional identities. You're starting to get at project 3 there, but looking ahead is not a bad idea. So the annotations have 3 parts. There's a whole separate video covering those. Each annotation is 150 words each. They will summarize the source that you have, they will evaluate the source that you have, and they will contextualize the source that they have. And again, there's a whole separate video that you need to watch to talk about this. All of your sources need to say different things. There's no sense in me telling you to get 8 different sources, researching different intersectional identities, if all you get is the same source, basically. So if the sources all say the same thing, make sure that you're looking for a variety of sources. So let's go back to talking about researching both sides, right? So that's the common conception of research, is that there's 2 sides. There's a Republican and a Democrat. There's black and white, for, against. That's not true of any complex research project, especially in this political climate right now. We have to get out of the idea that there's no middle ground, there's no nuanced positions. And this is why I'm having you look at a topic in an intersectional manner, because I want you to start to understand how complicated these issues are. So I'm going to start, I really want you to get that out of your head, is that there's not a pro and a con, and there's not just both sides, and there's not for and against, and there's not just Republican and Democrat. Why we research both sides is a limited way. So think of yourself and your stance on any issue. Do you just think in terms of sides, right? Are you just like, I am a Republican through and through, and that's all I stand for? Or I am a woman, and I take the woman's position on everything. I don't think so, right? As individuals, as human beings with different connections to different issues, we have what I would rather call positions, right? As a 34-year-old woman who grew up in the Midwest, who's white and heterosexual, this is my position on this issue. Now, I don't have a position because I'm heterosexual, right? Like, personally, I support same-sex marriage, and I support trans issues and things like that. And it's not that my position is heterosexual, but my position personally sometimes informs the stances that I take on certain issues. So I don't always side with Democrats. I don't always side with women. I don't always choose to be on a certain team. And what I'm explaining here is how human beings and how much more nuanced an issue is. So that's one of the things actually that we can look at during the current election, is that a lot of pundits have talked about how mind-boggling it is that people who voted for Barack Obama now voted for Donald Trump, right? And one of the issues on the table is the Affordable Care Act, is that President Obama put together this Affordable Care Act, and in so many ways that was his baby. And it's given a lot more people health insurance, right? And it's the people who voted for Donald Trump this time that have benefited from the Affordable Care Act, they stand to lose it, right? These people are complicated people. They voted for Donald Trump for a certain reason, right? And it wasn't because of the Affordable Care Act. It was because of the message that Donald Trump put out. If they were voting completely with their party, which was at one point Democrat and now is since Republican, they would have voted Obama, but they aren't. If they were just voting on the Affordable Care Act, right, they would have stuck with Hillary Clinton, but they didn't. So it's actually a really nuanced position. Intersectionality adds something to a lot of different topics. So when we start to think not about just people who are in privileged positions, people who are speaking up, people who are voicing their opinions, intersectionality helps us think through more people. They help us think through more positions. They help us with more diverse people. So if we're just, like so maybe a couple years ago, there was a push that we need women to tell their stories of abortions. And a number of celebrities came out and talked about how their decision to have an abortion, right? And these people are highly privileged, highly respected people. The same thing, a lot of, families came out. Not families, not a lot. A lot of people who have already had kids, mothers who have already had kids came out and told their stories too. But we don't often, whether it's social media or being in certain bubbles, we don't often hear from women of color, women in underprivileged communities, who are choosing to have an abortion for different reasons, right? Or who have talked about their issues having access to abortion or their reasons, We don't get to hear all of that. So intersectionality helps us think through these different people and why these different people would choose to do X, Y, or Z, right? And so that we can start to think of how policy should account for a wide range of lived experience. This notion, Dean Spade, which you're going to actually watch this video for Project 3, it's called trickle up social justice, is his argument is that if we provide safety nets for people at the bottom, or if we write policy for people sort of at the bottom position, in the most marginalized position, then actually we're able to account for more people in policy, as opposed to just writing policy for the most privileged classes. So example, right? Women make 79 cents to each dollar that a man makes. Now, when we start to break that down in terms of ethnicity, this statistic gets even crazier, okay? So we look at this. In the year 2003, we put white men at 100%. Black men make 75 cents of each dollar. Hispanic men, 67 cents on each dollar to a white man. 78 cents was white women. Black women, 64 cents. And Hispanic women, 54 cents. This right here, this statistic says that all women make 79 cents to each dollar. But when we break it down by race and ethnicity, then all of a sudden, and then this one even breaks it down further than education, we become more expansive in our knowledge on this topic. And policy, like if we were trying to lessen the gender pay gap, we could conclude, if we did extensive research, that policy would also have to look at the race, ethnicity, gender, and education pay gap. We would have to take into account these things to really be effective to close some of these biases in pay. So again, we could also look at different occupations here. And the more questions we have that help inform intersectional positions, the better we get in our research. So I leave you here. So what questions do we ask of our topics to perform intersectional research? That's something you need to decide. When you get to the point where you're like, this is my issue, what questions do you have to ask to get to the point where you're getting intersectional research, okay? All right. I am very excited to read your topic proposals and start to get a handle as to what you're doing for this project. So have a great day.